Hey guys, Tyler Berger here with Bass Fishing HQ, and today I want to talk about why this stupid dumb Ned Rig actually is one of the best bass lures out there and how science actually proves it. So stay tuned, it's going to be a good one. So today is a little bit different video. I want to tell you about this scientific experiment that was done a number of years ago that you can actually find a lot of articles online, but I really haven't seen anyone do a video about this particular experiment that was done. And then at the very end of the video, I'm gonna have 3 tips related to the experiment that can really help with your bass fishing. This video is brought to you by the Bass Hat, and I have several different colors of the Bass Hat. It's a unique hat. It comes with this really unique wooden bass patch on the top of the hat. If you guys click on the link in the description, you can support the channel by buying one of these hats. Let's get into the experiment that was done. Now, this experiment was actually done by Pure Fishing by a guy named Keith Jones. Everybody knows that bass love crawfish. Crawfish, crayfish, crawdads, however you say them, bass love them, and every bass fisherman knows that bass love them. But he wanted to do an experiment and see how bass actually reacted to a crayfish style plastic bait. And what he found out about how bass react to a crawl style bait like the one that I'm holding right now is very, very interesting to me. But once I read it and I understood it, something was very obvious in my mind, and I'm about to share that with you guys here in a minute as to why a certain lure works really, really well. This is your typical crawl plastic bait. It's got a body with a couple of legs here and a couple of bigger pinchers on it. They wanted to see how bass actually reacted to a crawl style bait. And what they found was actually kind of amazing. And so what they did is they had this robotic arm that basically would present a plastic bait in front of a number of fish. I think they tested like 450 bass over this course of time. And the first thing that they did is they showed it the regular piece of plastic, just like this, with legs and with crawls, just your piece of plastic, and they had several bass come up and strike the bait. The next thing that they did with the experiment is they actually took the pinchers off of this crawl. So they snipped the pinchers off of this particular crawl that they were using, and what was left was a little body part with a couple of legs, just like I have here. What they found is that the bass actually strike and ate this thing better than they did when it actually had pinchers on it, which is really, really interesting, right? Because we all fish crawls that have pinchers on them and whatnot, but they actually found that the bass ate this one a lot better, which is really, really unique. So then what they did is they actually took these little appendages, these little legs, and they actually pulled all the legs off, just like I'm doing right now, and they presented the bass with this little turd, just like this, right? Just a cylinder body, basically nothing to it. And again, the bass ate this even better than they ate the little one that had the appendages on it, the legs on it. So they found that bass actually ate this plastic, I mean, literally there's nothing to it, right? There's nothing to it at all. They ate this the best out of anything, which is crazy. Do you know what? It makes a lot of sense, because do you know what this thing looks like? Like what I just called it before, a turd? A Ned Rig, right? A Ned Rig is basically this exact same thing. And it's exactly like this, no nothing, no crawls, no appendages, crawl. That is the reason why you get a lot more bites on a Ned Rig than, say, for instance, a lot of other different lures. One of the most interesting parts of that research and that experiment that they did is that they concluded that bass would eat this stub, just like a Ned Rig, better than anything else. But what they found is that they thought that people wouldn't buy this in a store. They actually at Pure Fishing found, they did some other studies and said that people aren't going to pay money for a piece of bait that looks just like this, right? Just a plastic, no-nothing turd of a lure. But guess what? They will pay money for it, right? And they pay a lot of money for it. And almost every fisherman out there uses this bait now. Not every fisherman uses it, but almost every fisherman has a Ned Rig in their box, right? It's kind of that go-to finesse lure. Like when you can't get bit on anything, you throw the little turd, the Ned Rig, this stupid little piece of plastic, and the sucker gets bit, right? It gets bit in cold water, hot water. It gets bit all the time. And it makes sense that it gets bit all the time because of the research that they did. Am I saying that this is going to outperform any lure in your box? No, because everything is so conditional in bass fishing, right? I use jigs all the time that have crawls on them. I use just a crawl bait like the one I showed you earlier, and I flip it just like so, right? So I'm not saying that this is always going to outperform it, but it does make sense why this particular bait really kind of blew up over the last several years, because a lot of people were throwing the crawl style baits, or if they were throwing a worm, it was a longer worm, but they found that this little chubby turd rig, or this kind of stupid Ned rig, which I feel like everybody calls it, that's why it got bit so much more. So with that being said, guys, I actually have one modification that I really like to do to my Ned rigs, and also 2 tips that I want to share with you. So let's first talk about the modification to a Ned rig. And guys, this is something that is actually just very frustrating. If you've ever fished, you know, this Ned rig that I'm holding here is kind of the one that is probably the most famous. It's the Z-Man TRD. And it's on a Z-Man head. When you get these heads out of the package, you'll notice that it's a hook with a half moon shaped head on it, and it has this little barb on the underside of the hook that actually kind of helps prevent the plastic from sliding down the hook. The only problem is that barb actually leads to a lot of frustration, and I'm talking a lot of frustration, because what happens is, especially if you're catching a lot of fish, what happens is that plastic, especially if you're using Elastec, the plastic bait is going to ride up your bait from time to time, and what's going to happen is you're going to get this Ned that kind of looks like this, right? It gets all kinked up all the time, and like you go to cast it and it starts wearing a hole in that spot, and it just stays kinked up, and it's actually really, really frustrating. For whatever reason, you kind of have to pull the Ned back down, and you can never get it quite as straight as it originally was. It always kind of has this weird kink to it, and that's the one thing that's kind of frustrating about a Ned rig is that happens a lot. And the reason that happens is because of that little barb on the bottom. So the modification that I like to do to any Ned rig is I actually take that barb off. I just take a pair of pliers and I rip that barb off. And so what you're left with is basically just a hook and a mushroom style weight. And so with that being said, now you have a hook that has no barb on it, and all you need to do is use a little dab of glue, put the dab of glue on the back of the actual head, and stick the bait to it. And guys, especially if you're using Elastec, which most of us do on the Ned rig, it's going to stick to that, and it's going to hold literally all day long. And the best thing is you're not going to have that kinking issue that I was talking about earlier. When you start catching a lot of fish, it's not going to get all kinked up on you. If you know you're going to be fishing a Ned rig, the biggest thing is that you lose them from time to time, right? If you rig up 4 or 5 of these the night before, I'm telling you, you might only use one of them, but it's better than actually gluing them up while you're in your boat, because if you're like most bass fishermen, you're impatient. You want to stick your Ned rig in the water before the super glue actually dries up. That's not ideal. So rig these up the night before, take that barb off. You're gonna have a lot better fishing, and you're gonna go through a lot less baits. All right, guys, so tip number 2 when it comes to fishing a Ned rig, and it's kind of a 2-part tip. And the first part is basically that there's really no wrong way to fish a Ned, right? You can bounce a Ned, you can hop a Ned, and you're gonna catch fish. But I think one of the most effective ways to catch bass on a Ned rig is by slowly, very slowly dragging this bait across the bottom. And I'm talking as slow as you can. And when you think you're going slow, go a little bit slower. So that little slow presentation along the bottom is something that's just a little bit different than a lot of bass see, right? They're typically seeing jigs and other things hopped across the bottom or dragged kind of fast, but something that's really, really slow is just different, right? And I think that is what's very effective. Now, with that being said, I really like to fish my Ned rig on a 7-foot medium action rod. I used to use a 7.6 a lot when I fish Ned rigs, And I didn't notice it until I actually got into shallow water fishing Ned Rig, where I could actually see the Ned while I was pulling it through the water. And I realized that with a 7-foot 6-inch rod, when I would just kind of barely, you know, move the bait or kind of twitch it like this, that bait was actually hopping a lot further than I thought. And so by stepping down to the 7 foot instead of that 7.6, you actually don't have the bait hopping quite as much. And again, I think that if you can really slowly drag this across the bottom, you're gonna get more bites. Now, like I said, I caught a lot of fish using a 7.6, but you just have to pay attention. Don't overwork that bait, because you might get more bites just creeping this thing across the bottom. All right, guys, so the last tip that I want to share with you when it comes to Ned Rig fishing is use as light of a weight as possible. As light as you can, right? Like, and if you're fishing it uber slow with a light weight, it's almost painful, right? It's almost painful. This is not a lure that you really want to search for bass with. You kind of want to find the bass, and then this is kind of what you use to actually catch them. Using the lightest weight as possible is really going to give that Ned Rig a really nice action. It's going to just kind of glide across the bottom. It's going to look extremely natural to a bass, right? If you have a really heavy Ned Rig, a 1/4 ounce, a 1/5 ounce, it's not going to look quite as natural. Now, of course, there are exceptions, right? If you're fishing in current, you might want to step it up. If you're fishing really deep water, you might want to step it up. But guys, most of the time I like to use a 1/10 ounce weight or lighter, right? So a 1/10 ounce, you can work that in anywhere up to about 12 to 14 feet. But again, you're gonna work this really slow. But I'm telling you, if you can use as light a weight as possible, you're gonna get a lot more bites on a Ned Rig. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it. Please leave a comment if you have questions, and please subscribe for more videos. I'll see you guys in the next video.